Let me share the story of a place where a furious storm became the most peaceful thing imaginable. A sanctuary where the wind's howl became a lullaby, and where strangers, brought together by circumstance, found connection in the most unexpected way. This is the story of the Jade Cove Sanctuary, and the remarkable night when the weather wrote a different itinerary for everyone. My friend, welcome. I'm your guide on winds of thought. Wherever you are, whatever weight you carry from today, set it down now. This time is yours. Let your mind travel far from here, to a hidden stretch of coastline where turquoise waters meet lush green cliffs. There, nestled like a secret between jungle and sea, rests the Jade Cove Sanctuary. Its architecture speaks of both luxury and harmony: smooth river stones, dark teak wood, and wide openings that breathe with the ocean air. On most days, sunlight filters through bamboo shades, painting patterns on the polished floors. On most days, guests wander between pool and spa, between yoga pavilion and private beach. But this story isn't about most days. This story begins on the morning when the sky decided to tell a different tale. First, let's settle into this moment together. Notice where your body meets the surface beneath you. The bed, the couch, the floor, feel its steadfast support. And beneath that, the ancient, constant grounding of the earth itself. With each exhale, imagine yourself sinking a little deeper into that support, becoming heavier, more present. 10. Let the sounds around you, the distant traffic, the hum of appliances, the rustle of your own breathing, let them all soften into a gentle background chorus. You are safe here. My voice is simply a companion, a thread of calm for you to follow into restful landscapes. 9. Bring a gentle awareness to your body. Where does the day still cling? In the tightness of your jaw? The slight hunch of your shoulders? The faint ache in your lower back? Don't judge it. Don't try to force it away. Simply acknowledge it with kindness, as you would a tired friend. And with your next long, slow exhale, imagine that tension dissolving, melting into the air around you. 8. Whatever has happened today is now in the past. Whatever waits for tomorrow is not yet here. In this moment, there is only now. Thoughts will come, that is the nature of the mind. See them as leaves floating down a calm stream. Notice them, acknowledge their presence, and then watch them drift peacefully away. 7. This time belongs entirely to you. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you must do. You have full permission to simply be. To rest. To let go completely. 6. Somewhere within you, beneath the layers of thought and sensation, exists a quiet pool of perfect peace. It's always there, waiting. Perhaps you can sense it as a soft warmth in the center of your chest, or a gentle light behind your closed eyes. Find that anchor point now, and rest your awareness there. 5. Bring to mind one simple thing you feel grateful for in this moment. The shelter around you. The comfort of this position. The love that exists in your life, in whatever form it takes. Let that feeling of gratitude swell gently, like a tide coming in. 4. Now, let your imagination begin to paint. Picture that secluded retreat, the Jade Cove Sanctuary. See it nestled into the emerald hillside, its roofs like stepping stones descending toward the sea. Hear the distant crash of waves against the cliff base. Smell the salt air mingled with frangipani and damp earth. But look up. The sky is not its usual brilliant blue. It's a canvas of deepening gray, of bruised purple and slate. 3. A wind is rising. It whispers through the coconut palms, making their long fronds sway and rustle with a sound like rushing water. It's a signal. A change is coming. 2. Feel the anticipation in the air, the electric stillness before the release. 1. And now, we step gently into the story, as the first guests of our tale begin their day, unaware of how it will transform. In Villa 3, Alara stood on her private balcony, a printed itinerary in her hand. She was a woman who found comfort in order, her life and vacations neatly segmented into color-coded blocks. This morning, sunrise meditation, 6 a.m. Then, organic breakfast buffet, 7:30. Followed by, guided rainforest hike, 9 o'clock. The schedule was her compass, and she held it firmly. Leo, the hike leaves in 40 minutes, she called into the spacious room. You need to eat something. From within, her partner Leo emerged, hair still damp from the shower, a book in one hand. I was thinking, he said, his voice calm, what if we just didn't? What if we sat on this balcony all morning and watched whatever the sky decides to do? He gestured toward the horizon where clouds were gathering with intentional heaviness. Alara followed his gaze, a flicker of anxiety crossing her face. Don't say that. The forecast said scattered showers. That means it might rain for 20 minutes. She tapped her itinerary. This hike goes to a waterfall. It's supposed to be spectacular. Leo smiled, a warm, easy expression that had initially drawn her to him. He was the counterbalance to her precision, a man who believed the best moments were the unscripted ones. The waterfall will still be spectacular tomorrow, he said. But this, he inhaled deeply. This air, this pressure, it feels like a story is about to begin. As if on cue, a single, fat raindrop landed on the balcony's teak railing with an audible plop. Then another. Then a dozen. Within seconds, the scattered drops became a steady, insistent patter. In the distance, a low rumble of thunder rolled in from the sea, not loud, but profound, like the earth clearing its throat. Down in the main pavilion, a man named Arthur secured his preferred armchair. It was positioned exactly where the open-walled lounge met the covered terrace, offering an unobstructed view of the ocean. Arthur was in his late 70s, with a neatly trimmed white beard and eyes that missed very little. He wore a crisp, short-sleeved linen shirt and held himself with the quiet posture of someone accustomed to observing. A retired marine biologist, he had spent decades studying weather patterns and ocean currents. To him, a storm wasn't an inconvenience, it was a fascinating, living system. On the small table beside him rested a leather-bound notebook, a fountain pen, and a glass of iced lemongrass tea. He opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote the date. Then, he simply watched. He noted the way the fronds of the traveler's poem were already turning their backs to the wind, a natural sheltering behavior. He observed the changing color of the sea, from friendly turquoise to a formidable, deep jade green. His hand moved occasionally, sketching the cloud formations, cumulonimbus building with great vertical energy. Near the central reception desk, a young staff member named Kai felt the shift in the atmosphere. At 28, Kai was the sanctuary's guest experience manager, a role he performed with a serene dedication that seemed innate. He had grown up on a nearby island and understood the moods of this coast intimately. He watched the first guests trickle into the lounge, their faces reflecting dashed plans, a cancelled boat trip, a postponed cycling tour. Kai moved to the antique brass bell at the reception desk and rang it once, a clear, melodic sound that cut through the growing noise of the rain. Conversations paused as guests turned. Ladies and gentlemen, Kai said, his voice calm and carrying. For your safety and comfort, all outdoor activities for today have been suspended. The weather system is moving faster than anticipated. We invite you to enjoy the sanctuary's indoor amenities. The spa has extended its hours, the library is fully stocked, and our chefs are preparing a special storm day menu. Please, make yourselves at home. A murmur moved through the gathered guests. Some sighed with resignation. Others looked genuinely distressed. But a few, like Arthur, simply nodded and settled deeper into their chairs. One such person was Madame Genevieve. She entered the lounge from the garden path, holding a large, elegant umbrella aloft, though the wind threatened to invert it. Beneath it, her silver hair was coiled in an impeccable chignon. A few steps behind her followed a staff member carefully carrying a woven basket. From within the basket, a small, caramel-colored Pomeranian peeked out, its eyes bright with alertness. "This will not do, Philippe," Madame Genevieve said to the young man, though her tone was more theatrical than angry. "Machi's morning constitutional is a non-negotiable ritual. He requires specific sniffing opportunities." "Of course, madam," Philippe replied, trying to keep the basket level as another gust swept rain under the eaves. "But perhaps today, the sniffing opportunities will be interior?" Madame Genevieve sighed dramatically, closing her umbrella with a precise click. "Very well. One must adapt. But see to it that his organic chicken broth is warmed precisely to body temperature for his lunch. He detects temperature discrepancies with the sensitivity of a sommelier." She chose a plush armchair near the fireplace, which, though unlit, formed a natural focal point, and arranged herself and Machi's basket with the care of a curator installing a priceless exhibit. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, taking inventory of her fellow stormbound companions. She noted Arthur's observational stillness, Kai's competent calm, and the couple, Alara and Leo, who now entered the lounge, Alara clutching her damp itinerary like a life raft. Alara approached Kai. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tight. "This hike. Is there any chance it might clear up later? Even if we start a few hours late?" Kai offered a sympathetic smile that reached his eyes. "I'm afraid the system is settling in for the day. The paths will be too slippery, and the rainforest, it becomes a different place in this weather." "Truly, for your safety." Leo placed a hand on Alara's shoulder. "See? The universe is insisting. A day of forced relaxation. When was the last time we had one of those?" Kai and his team worked quietly in the background, transforming the space. They lit clusters of cinnamon-scented candles, their flames dancing safely in glass hurricanes. They rolled out a portable speaker and began playing a soft, ambient soundtrack of hang drums and gentle strings, just loud enough to complement, not compete with, the symphony of the storm. A long table was adorned with trays of comfort food, miniature savory tarts, bowls of spiced nuts, slices of moist banana bread. Alara found herself staring not at her phone, but at the hypnotic dance of the rain on the cove below. She watched as waves, transformed from gentle rollers into crashing white beasts, hurled themselves against the black rocks. There was a terrifying beauty to it. Leo had fetched a board game from the library, but it sat unopened between them. They simply sat, shoulders touching, watching. "It's kind of magnificent," Alara whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. "It is," Leo agreed. "I feel like we're watching the planet breathe. Deeply and powerfully." Madame Genevieve had produced a small embroidery hoop from her bag and was working on an intricate floral pattern. Machi slept in his basket, twitching occasionally as he dreamed of chasing raindrops. Arthur continued his notations, but his pen moved slower now, his scientific observation blending with simple awe. The storm, however, was only warming up. As the afternoon light faded into an early, gloomy twilight, the wind found a new strength. It howled now, a rising and falling note that sounded almost animal. It rushed through the architectural gaps in the pavilion, making the candle flames lean and shudder. Then, a particularly powerful gust, a concentrated blast of air, shot across the terrace. It caught Arthur's wide-brimmed sun hat, which he had placed on the empty chair beside him. The hat lifted, spun once in the air like a tossed coin, and then sailed inward, across the border between terrace and lounge. Time seemed to slow. Guests watched as the beige hat flew in a graceful arc, directly toward the large, tranquil koi pond that was the centerpiece of the lounge's interior garden. It landed with a definitive, damp thwack right in the middle of the pond, floating crown up, its brim slowly sinking beneath the surface like a sinking ship. Two large, orange and white koi fish darted away in surprise, then returned to circle this strange, new lily pad. A stunned silence held for a second. Then, a snort of laughter escaped from Leo. It broke the tension. Soon, gentle chuckles rippled through the lounge. Even Arthur looked at his floating hat, then at the assembled guests, and a genuine, surprised laugh erupted from him, a rich, warm sound. "Well," he said, standing. "I suppose it wanted a closer look at the fish." Kai was already in motion. He didn't rush. He went to a corner and retrieved a long bamboo pole used for adjusting high window shades. He approached the pond's edge, calculated the angle, and with a careful, precise motion, hooked the inner band of the hat. He drew it slowly across the water, lifting it just before the brim could drag through the lily pads. Water streamed from it in rivulets. He presented the dripping hat to Arthur with both hands, a small, respectful bow of his head. "The wind can be an imprecise valet, Mr. Henderson. My apologies." Arthur took the soggy offering, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Not at all, Kai. It provided the afternoon's entertainment. And gave the koi something to gossip about." He looked around at the smiling faces. "A small price to pay." Madame Genevieve gave a definitive nod. "A commendable rescue. Efficiency with kois. Machi approves, and he is a harsh critic of service." The little dog, now awake, did indeed seem to be watching the proceedings with keen interest. The shared moment, the small crisis averted with grace, acted like a key turning in a lock. The invisible barriers between strangers began to soften. Alara got up and brought a towel from a nearby stack to Arthur. The solo traveler, Anya, asked if anyone knew what kind of koi they were. The family's children crept closer to peer at the fish. Kai saw the opportunity. "Would anyone care for some proper tea? We have just prepared a fresh batch of our storm special, a black tea blend with orange peel, cloves, and a hint of smoked cinnamon. It's quite fortifying." There was a murmur of assent. Guests began to drift toward the tea station, no longer isolated islands but parts of an emerging archipelago. As they gathered, pouring tea, selecting biscuits, the conversations began, tentative at first, then flowing more easily. Arthur spoke of studying ocean storms from research vessels. Anya revealed she was a composer, here to find silence, and had instead found this magnificent noise. Alara confessed her struggle with stillness. Leo shared his theory that modern life had made everyone forget how to simply be bored, and how boredom was the birthplace of creativity. Madame Genevieve listened, sipping her tea with her pinky finger elegantly extended. Finally, she spoke. "You are all correct, in your ways. But you are missing the central point." She paused, ensuring she had their attention. "This storm is not an interruption of your holiday. It is your holiday. A different one than you planned, but perhaps the one you needed. The universe has a peculiar sense of humor, and a rather direct way of getting our attention." As if to emphasize her point, the world outside suddenly went dark. Not just dark, a profound, total blackness swallowed the vista of churning sea and lashing palms. At the same moment, the lounge's lights flickered, dipped, and went out. The ambient music cut off abruptly. The only light came from the dozens of candle flames, which now seemed to leap and dance with renewed importance in the sudden gloom. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by a thick, waiting silence. The sound of the storm seemed to grow louder, more intimate, in the absence of other noise. The howl of the wind, the drumming of the rain on the roof, it was all suddenly immediate, pressing against the glass. In the candlelit darkness, faces were turned toward the windows, then toward each other, eyes wide. The cozy sanctuary now felt fragile, a pocket of light in a vast, roaring dark. Kai's calm voice cut through the stillness. Do not be alarmed. The backup generator will engage momentarily. It's designed for this. His voice was an anchor in the sudden uncertainty. But seconds ticked by. 5. 10. The generator did not kick in. The darkness remained absolute beyond their circle of candlelight. The storm's voice was the only sound, and it seemed to be laughing. For 3 long heartbeats, the darkness was absolute, and the storm's voice was the only reality. The cozy sanctuary of moments before now felt like a fragile raft on a roaring, black sea. The candle flames, which had seemed so charming, now cast long, dancing shadows that made familiar shapes look strange and looming. Then, a deep, mechanical cough echoed from somewhere beneath the floor, a sound of gears engaging, of diesel fuel igniting. A moment later, a low, steady hum vibrated through the building. The lights flickered back to life, not all at once, but in a graceful wave. First, the subtle floor lighting along the paths. Then, the soft amber sconces on the stone columns. Finally, the main overhead fixtures glowed at a dimmed, warm setting. The ambient music resumed, the same gentle hang drum melody, as if it had never stopped. A collective, audible sigh of relief filled the lounge. Shoulders that had hunched toward ears now relaxed. Nervous laughter bubbled up, a release of tension. Kai, who had remained perfectly still near the reception desk, gave a small, professional nod. The backup system is now online. We have full power, and the storm shutters on the lower levels are engaged. You are all perfectly safe. His calm was a bedrock in the shifting emotional landscape. Madame Genevieve, who had not flinched but had placed a protective hand on Machi's basket, spoke into the renewed light. Well, that was adequately dramatic. It seems the storm wished to remind us who is in charge. A pointless exercise, as we were already aware. Her dry observation drew more genuine laughter, solidifying the shared experience into a kind of camaraderie. Arthur, holding his still damp hat, looked around the brightly lit, warm room, then out at the violent darkness. The contrast is rather marvelous, isn't it? He mused, mostly to himself. Out there, primal chaos. In here, light, warmth, and company. He said the last word as if it were a novel discovery. Alara found her hand was gripping Leo's. She slowly uncurled her fingers, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. I guess a little excitement is okay, she admitted quietly. More than okay, Leo said, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. It makes this, he gestured to the tray of tea and cookies, the plush sofas, the circle of people, feel like a genuine treasure. Something earned, not just given. The mood in the lounge had irrevocably shifted. The blackout, though brief, had been a collective baptism. They were no longer just guests sharing a space, they were survivors of a minor, shared ordeal. The invisible walls were gone. Kai, sensing the new dynamic, moved into action. He conferred quietly with a few staff members. Soon, they were rolling a mobile bar toward the central seating area, not laden with alcohol, but with an array of ceramic teapots, honey pots, and bowls of lemon slices. Another staff member began to light the kindling that had been laid in the great stone fireplace. Within minutes, honest flames were licking at seasoned wood, casting a dynamic, living light across the gathered faces and adding the soft, comforting crackle of burning logs to the room's soundtrack. Please, Kai invited, his arms open in a welcoming gesture. Bring your cups. The hearth is the oldest gathering place. Let's honor the tradition. Slowly, the group migrated. Alara and Leo brought their sofa cushions to the floor near the fire. Arthur reclaimed his armchair, dragging it closer. Madame Genevieve arranged her chair with precise proximity to both the fire's warmth and the tea station. Anya, the composer, joined them, sitting cross-legged on a floor pillow. The family with children settled on a large rug, the kids now whispering excitedly about the adventure. As the fire grew, so did the ease between them. The initial small talk deepened. "You mentioned you study storms, Arthur?" Anya asked, her voice curious. "What is this one saying?" Arthur leaned forward, his eyes alight with professional passion. "It's saying it's vigorous but not vengeful. The wind direction shift means it's cycling through its energy predictably. The rapid pressure drop we experienced is now stabilizing. It's a healthy storm. Cleansing. It will scour the reefs, deliver fresh water to the forest canopy, and by tomorrow, the air will be so clear you'll feel you can see forever." He spoke with a reverence that was contagious. "I like that," Leo said. "A healthy storm. Not a disaster, just the ecosystem taking a deep, powerful breath." "Precisely," Arthur nodded. Madame Genevieve accepted a fresh cup of tea from Kai. "And what of our small ecosystem in here? What is its prognosis, Doctor?" Arthur smiled. "I'm a marine biologist, madam, not a social one. But I'd hypothesize it's thriving. Adversity, even in small, symbolic doses, tends to promote social bonding. It's a well-documented phenomenon in many species." "We are bonding, aren't we?" Alara said, surprised by her own observation. She had been so focused on her cancelled plans, she hadn't noticed the new ones forming in real time. "I don't even know your names." "I'm Alara. This is Leo." Introductions rippled around the circle: Arthur, Anya, Madame Genevieve and Machi, who received a gentle head scratch from Leo. The children were Liam and Chloe, their parents, Mark and Sophia. "And what brings you all to the edge of the world during monsoon season?" Madame Genevieve inquired, not prying, but presiding. One by one, stories unfolded, illuminated by firelight. Anya was here on a grant, seeking silence to compose a piece about coral reefs, but had found the storm's symphony far more compelling. Mark and Sophia, the parents, confessed this was their first trip without the children's grandparents in tow. The storm had forced them to actually sit and play with their kids, a revelation they were grateful for. Arthur was finishing a book and had come for the solitude, but found he didn't miss it. When it came to Alara and Leo, Alara hesitated. "I came here to perfectly optimize a week of relaxation," she said, the irony now clearing her voice. "Spreadsheets, reviews, pinned locations on a map. I was going to return home perfectly restored and efficiently cultured." "And now?" Anya asked gently. "Now," Alara said, looking into the fire, "I think I might return home different. Less optimized, maybe. But more present." Leo took her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. As the conversations wove together, Kai and his team performed a silent ballet of hospitality. Blankets appeared, draped over the backs of chairs. A platter of warm, mini-savory pies, curried vegetable and spiced lamb, was placed within reach, their aroma mingling with wood smoke and cinnamon. The storm, now a constant white noise backdrop, became the walls of their shared castle. At one point, Liam, the younger boy, pointed to the grand piano that stood in a corner of the lounge, mostly forgotten. "Does that work?" Kai followed his gaze. "It does. It's tuned regularly." "Can anyone play it?" Chloe asked. Anya's head tilted. She looked at the piano, then at the circle of faces, then at the storm. Without a word, she stood, walked to the instrument, and lifted the fallboard. She sat, adjusted the stool, and let her hands hover over the keys for a moment, listening to the rhythm of the rain. Then, She began to play. It wasn't a formal piece. It was an improvisation. Slow, tentative notes at first, echoing the distant thunder. Then a rising melody, clear and sweet like a shaft of sunlight trying to break through cloud. Her left hand built chords that were deep and resonant, like the roll of the waves below the cliff. She wove in fragments of the hang drum melody still playing from the speakers, integrating them, answering them. She was composing in real time, translating the storm and the feeling in the room into music. Everyone fell silent, mesmerized. This was no longer background music, it was the soundtrack of their shared evening. Alara felt chills on her arms. Arthur closed his eyes, a smile on his lips. Madame Genevieve gave a single, slow nod of artistic approval. The children stared, open-mouthed. Anya played for perhaps 10 minutes, the piece evolving, finding moments of tension that mirrored the wind's howl, and resolutions that felt like the safe embrace of the fire. When she finally let the last note fade into the sound of the rain, she simply placed her hands in her lap and bowed her head. For a moment, there was only the storm. Then, spontaneous, soft applause rippled around the room. Not loud, but deeply felt. "That was incredible," Leo breathed. "You just made that up?" "We all did," Anya said softly, turning on the stool. "I just translated it." The spell was broken, but the magic remained, now woven into the fabric of the night. The music had been a shared heartbeat. Inspired, Mark, the father, suggested a game. "What about a story circle? One person starts a story with one sentence. The next person adds another sentence, and so on. We can make up a tale about a mysterious island that appears only in storms." The children squealed with delight. And so, the circle of adults and children began to craft a silly, epic tale about a floating island made of crystal, inhabited by friendly fog ghosts and a lonely lightning bird searching for its nest. Each contributor added their own flair. Madame Genevieve insisted the fog ghosts had impeccable etiquette. Arthur gave the island a realistic tidal ecosystem. Leo gave the lightning bird a sarcastic parrot sidekick. Laughter punctuated the narrative, loud and unself-conscious. Alara watched it all, a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. This was connection. Unplanned, messy, human connection. It was the antithesis of her color-coded itinerary, and it was infinitely more valuable. As the clock crept past what would normally be dinner time, Kai approached again. "The kitchen has prepared a simple, shared meal, if you are hungry. We thought, given the circumstances, a communal table might be pleasant." The idea was met with unanimous agreement. Staff moved 2 large teak tables together near the fire. They were set not with fine china, but with sturdy, beautiful pottery plates and cloth napkins. The food was brought out family style, a large, steaming clay pot of fragrant coconut fish curry, a platter of roasted root vegetables with herbs, a bowl of crunchy Asian slaw, and a mountain of fluffy jasmine rice. It was comforting, unpretentious, and abundant. They sat together, the elegant Madame Genevieve, the scholarly Arthur, the artistic Anya, the weary parents, the excited children, and Alara and Leo. They passed plates, served each other, and the conversation continued, now fueled by delicious food. They spoke of trivial things, favorite books, dream travel destinations, most embarrassing childhood memories. They spoke of deeper things, Anya's fear that her music wouldn't matter, Arthur's reflections on a life spent looking at the sea, Alara's confession of her constant anxiety about doing life right. In the safe, stormbound capsule of the lounge, vulnerabilities were offered and held gently. Madame Genevieve, perhaps softened by the fire, the food, or the company, shared a story of her own. "I came here not just for the linens," she said, stroking Machi, who was enjoying scraps of fish. "I came because it is the anniversary of my husband's passing. We spent our honeymoon on an island very like this, caught in a storm very like this. I suppose. I was trying to feel close to him again. To remember the excitement, not just the loss. The room grew quiet, respectful. And now, she continued, looking around at the faces, I find I am not remembering an old story. I am inside a new one. And that, I think, is a gift he would have approved of. It was a moment of profound, shared humanity. Alara felt tears prick her eyes, not of sadness, but of a sudden, overwhelming sense of being part of something real. After the meal, as staff cleared plates and brought out pots of decaffeinated chai and plates of dark chocolate truffles, the energy mellowed into a contented, sleepy quiet. The children, bellies full, fell asleep on the rug, tucked under blankets. The adults sipped their drinks, lost in the fire or the now familiar spectacle of the storm. The storm itself was changing. The relentless, driving roar had diminished to a steady, heavy pour. The wind's howl had dropped to a sigh. The lightning, which had been flashing almost constantly, now appeared as occasional, silent illuminations deep within the clouds, like a distant lighthouse. It's passing, Arthur announced, his ear tuned to the subtle shifts. The core has moved on. We're in the tail now. Soothing rain for hours, but the fury is spent. There was a faint hint of regret in the air. The intense, shared experience had a finite lifespan. The world outside was beginning to return to a gentler normal, which meant their unique, isolated world inside would soon end. Kai approached the group one final time. The storm shutter system will remain engaged for your safety until morning, but the worst is unquestionably over. The pathway to the villa wings is covered and safe if you wish to retire. Or, you are most welcome to stay here as long as you like. The fire will be maintained all night. People began to stretch, to make soft noises about turning in. But moving felt difficult, like breaking a perfect crystal. Madame Genevieve was the first to stand with purpose. I believe I will escort Machi to his suite. He requires his beauty sleep, as do I. She looked at the circle. This was unexpectedly agreeable. Thank you. One by one, they rose, exchanging not just goodnights, but looks of genuine fondness. Phone numbers and email addresses were not exchanged. This felt like a moment that belonged only to this night, in this place. Their connection was deep but context-bound, and that made it even more precious. Alara and Leo were the last to leave the fireside. They helped Kai stack a few cushions, then stood at the edge of the terrace, under the deep overhang, watching the rain. It fell in straight, silver lines in the light from the lounge. I don't want to go, Alara whispered. We don't have to, Leo said. We can stay right here for a while. And so they did, leaning against each other, listening to the healing rain, watching the embers of their extraordinary, unplanned day glow in the hearth. The story of the storm was winding down, but its quiet, transformative aftermath was just beginning to settle into their bones. Alara and Leo stood under the terrace overhang until the last embers in the great fireplace collapsed into a soft bed of glowing ash. The rain continued its steady, soothing patter, a gentle epilogue to the night's drama. The world felt rinsed, quiet, and profoundly still. When they finally walked back to their villa, the covered pathways glistened under subtle sensor lights, every leaf and petal holding a jewel of rainwater. The air they breathed was cool, clean, and charged with negative ions, giving it a sweet, electrified freshness. Inside Villa 3, the room felt different. The enormous bed wasn't just a luxurious prop anymore, it was a welcome harbor. Alara didn't plug in her phone to charge. She didn't check the next day's weather. She simply stood at the glass door, watching the residual drips fall from the roof, each one catching the light like a falling star. I feel like I've been on a long journey, she said, her voice soft with wonder. You have, Leo replied, coming to stand beside her. A journey to the center of stillness. It's farther than it looks on a map. They slept as they hadn't in years, a deep, dreamless, anchor-weight sleep, cradled by the distant, rhythmic hush of the retreating storm. In her elegant suite, Madame Genevieve performed her nightly ritual with precise care, but her movements were slower, more thoughtful. As she smoothed her own linen pillowcase over the hotel pillow, she didn't think of the past, of a long-ago honeymoon storm. She thought of the composer's music, the biologist's calm wisdom, the young couple's unfolding. She looked at Machi, already snoring softly in his velvet bed. "We met interesting people today," she whispered to the sleeping dog. "Not what I expected." "Better." She turned off the light and listened to the rain, a sound that no longer felt lonely. Arthur, in his room, placed his rescued hat on the writing desk. It was misshapen, the brim warped into a casual curve. He didn't try to reshape it. He liked its new character, a souvenir of an unexpected adventure. He opened his notebook and didn't write about barometric pressure or cloud formations. He wrote a single line: "The most fascinating system I observed today was human, not meteorological." He then closed the book, smiled, and was asleep in minutes. Anya, the composer, lay awake, but not with restless energy. Melodies and harmonies from the evening played in her mind, not just her own improvisation, but the counterpoint of voices, Arthur's gravelly bass, the children's bright treble, Madame Genevieve's precise mezzo-soprano. Her piece about coral reefs was forgotten. A new idea was forming, something about shelter, about found harmony and dissonance. She reached for her bedside notebook and scribbled a few words: "Storm Suite." Movement 1, the gathering. Movement 2, the hearth. Movement 3, the cleansing. Down in the staff quarters, Kai finally allowed his professional calm to ease. He sat with a cup of tea, reviewing the night. The generator had performed flawlessly after its initial, dramatic hiccup. No property damage. No guest injuries. Only positive reports from the team. But his metric for success wasn't in the logbook. It was in the image of guests from different worlds laughing together by the fire, sharing food, listening in silence to improvised music. He made a final note for management: recommend instituting storm gatherings as a formal protocol for future significant weather events. Essentials: fireplace, family-style comfort food, ambient music, and staff encouraged to facilitate, not just serve. He slept soundly, the proud captain of a ship that had weathered the waves beautifully. Dawn at the Jade Cove Sanctuary arrived not with a bang, but with a whisper. The rain had ceased completely sometime in the deep night. A profound, crystalline silence hung over the cove, broken only by the steady, happy drip of water from leaves. Then, as the sky lightened from black to deep blue to a soft, pearlescent gray, the birds began. Their chorus was riotous, celebratory, as if rejoicing in the washed-clean world. Alera woke to this symphony. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Leo, and stepped onto the balcony. The scene took her breath away. Every color was hypersaturated. The greens of the jungle were almost fluorescent. The white of the resort buildings glowed. The sea was a flat, calm sheet of hammered silver, reflecting the brightening sky. Mist rose from the warm earth in ghostly tendrils, weaving through the trees. The air was so clear she could see individual leaves on trees halfway up the distant cliffs. The storm had been powerful, but this was its gift. A world reborn, pristine, and breathtakingly beautiful. She felt a quiet euphoria. The rigid anxiety that usually greeted a new day, the "what must be done" list, was absent. In its place was a spacious curiosity. What would this new, clean world offer? When Leo joined her, they didn't speak. They just drank their coffee on the balcony, wrapped in robes, watching the mist burn away under the strengthening sun. Their planned boat trip was back on the schedule, but the urgency was gone. If it happened, it would be wonderful. If not, something else would be. The lobby at breakfast time was a different space. Bright morning light streamed in, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. The furniture had been returned to its original, elegant arrangement. The board games were back on the library shelf. But the energy was different. Guests nodded and smiled at each other with recognition. A family waved to Anya. Arthur gave Kai a respectful nod that conveyed volumes. Alara and Leo saw Madame Genevieve at her usual table, Machi seated beside her on a special cushion. She waved them over. "You look rested," she observed as they Saturday, "the storm agreed with you." "It did," Alara said, and it was the truest thing she'd said in a long time. "It really did." "I have decided," Madame Genevieve announced, sipping her espresso, "to extend my stay by 2 days. One cannot rush away from an epiphany. It requires integration." As they ate fresh fruit and fluffy eggs, a staff member approached, not Kai, but a young woman with a bright smile. "Good morning. Mr. Kai asked me to inform all guests who were in the main lounge last night that as a thank you for your wonderful spirit, a special post-storm snorkeling trip has been arranged at 11 a.m. The boat captain says the water clarity this morning is the best he's seen in a year. All sea life will be out and active. If you're interested, please meet at the dock." The offer floated over the table. Alara looked at Leo. The old, familiar twinge of schedule optimization popped up. "We should go. It's a unique opportunity. We'd be fools to miss it." But it was a faint echo. She waited, listening to a deeper instinct. "Do you want to?" Leo asked, his tone neutral, open. She looked out at the dazzling sea, then back at the cozy lounge, then at Madame Genevieve, who raised a knowing eyebrow. "I think," Alara said slowly, "I want to see what happens if we don't plan anything at all. Just for today." Leo's smile was a sunrise. "That," he said, "sounds like the best plan yet." They declined the snorkeling trip, as did Madame Genevieve. Saltwater is disastrous for Machi's curls. Arthur, however, lit up at the prospect of observing the reef post-storm and signed up immediately. Anya decided to go, hoping the underwater silence would feed her new composition. So, as one group headed eagerly to the dock, Alara, Leo, and Madame Genevieve found themselves together again, in the sunny, quiet lounge. It was a different kind of gathering, not forced by weather, but chosen. "So," Madame Genevieve said, "you have chosen the path of deliberate indeterminacy. A bold choice. What is its first action?" As if answering, Kai appeared. "The gardens are exceptionally beautiful this morning. Many flowers have bloomed overnight, triggered by the rain. The paths are damp but passable. If you are looking for a gentle activity, a walk would be highly rewarding." It felt like a sign. The three of them, plus Machi in his carrying bag, embarked on a slow walk through the resort's botanical gardens. The transformation was astounding. Flowers that had been tight buds the day before had burst open in explosive colors, vivid red heliconia, delicate orchid sprays, great white moonflowers that should have closed at dawn but lingered, drunk on rainwater. The smell was intoxicating, rich earth, wet stone, and 1,000 perfumes. They walked without a destination, pausing to admire a spiderweb glittering with a necklace of water droplets, or a tiny tree frog, brilliantly green, clinging to a broad leaf. They spoke little, but the silence was companionable. As they rounded a bend, they came upon a sight that made them stop. A large tree, stressed by the wind, had partially fallen. It wasn't a destructive crash, it had leaned gracefully against another tree, its root ball lifted from the earth, creating a dark, damp cave of exposed roots and soil. And there, in the rich, newly turned earth, were dozens of perfect, unopened seashells, conchs, cowries, augurs, washed up from the seabed and deposited by the storm's surge, now nestled in the forest floor like a pirate's treasure spilled in the wrong place. It was a surreal, magical sight, the forest and the sea mingled by the storm's power. "Oh!" Alara gasped, crouching down. She picked up a perfect tiger cowrie, its polished surface gleaming. "How is this even here?" "The storm's signature," Leo said, amazed. "A calling card." It reached into the ocean, grabbed a handful of treasures, and tossed them into the jungle. Madame Genevieve carefully selected a small, spiral auger shell. A memento. Infinitely better than a postcard. She placed it in her pocket. Alara held the cowrie shell, feeling its smooth, cool weight. It was a physical token of the night's lesson, that beautiful, unexpected things could be delivered by chaos. That plans could be shattered, only to reveal a more fascinating reality beneath. The walk back was filled with a light, buzzing wonder. The storm had not just passed, it had gifted them this moment, this hidden treasure. They spent the rest of the morning in quiet pursuits. Leo found a hammock and actually read his book. Alara, feeling a rare creative impulse, used the Notes app on her phone not to list tasks, but to jot down feelings, observations, fragments of the conversations from the night before. Madame Genevieve wrote postcards, her usual terse messages replaced with longer, more descriptive passages about the storm and the people she'd met. When the snorkeling group returned for lunch, they carried a new kind of energy, not just excitement, but a reverent awe. Arthur's eyes were wide. The reef, it was like it was celebrating. The colors were vibrating. Fish species I haven't seen in years were out in schools. It was a cleansing. The storm washed away the sediment, stressed the coral just enough to make it expel its algae and glow. It was ecological renewal in action. Anya was quiet, but her face was radiant. "I put my head underwater and just listened," she said. The crackles, the pops, the songs. It was the storm's aftermath, the underwater version of our lounge. All that life, just carrying on, beautifully. The two groups, the adventurers and the wanderers, shared lunch, exchanging stories. The snorkelers described the underwater wonderland. Alara described the seashells in the jungle. Both were tales of the storm, hidden gifts, discovered only by being present and open. The afternoon melted away in a pleasant haze. Some napped. Some swam in the now sparkling pool. Alara and Leo finally took that long, leisurely bath in their room's freestanding tub, watching the sunlight play on the water's surface. As evening approached on this new, pristine day, a subtle question hung in the air. Would they all come together again? Or would they slip back into the polite anonymity of regular resort life? The answer came from Kai. He had placed small, handwritten notes in each of their rooms, delivered with the turn-down service. "The hearth will be lit again tonight, should you wish to witness the first stars over the cleansed cove. No agenda. Just the fire, and the company, if you choose it." Kai. It wasn't an obligation. It was an invitation. And that made all the difference. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of peach and lavender, they each, independently, made their way back to the main lounge. The fire was already crackling. The same low, ambient music played. But the tea station was simpler. The sofas were arranged in a loose circle. It was a quieter, more intentional gathering. They smiled as they arrived, not with the surprised recognition of the previous night, but with the warm welcome of friends reconvening. The conversation picked up threads from the day, weaving them into the ongoing tapestry. They spoke of the shells, the reef, the quiet discoveries. And then, Anya asked a question that changed the tone. "What will you take from this? Not in your suitcase, but from all of this?" She gestured around the circle, and implicitly, to the memory of the storm. The answers came, thoughtful and honest. Arthur spoke first. A reminder that I am not just an observer of nature. I am part of it. And that human connection, however fleeting, is as natural and powerful as any weather system. Madame Genevieve was next. I will take the understanding that one can honor the past without living in it. That new stories are always waiting, even for an old woman and her dog. Mark and Sophia, the parents, said they were taking home a new commitment to storm days at home, unplanned days forced by weather or circumstance where the only plan is to be together. Leo said, I'm taking the courage to trust the unplanned more often. And the proof, he squeezed Alara's hand, that the best things aren't found on an itinerary. All eyes turned to Alara. She had been listening, her thumb rubbing the smooth cowrie shell in her pocket. She took a deep breath. I'm taking a new definition of peace, she said. I thought peace was the absence of disturbance. A perfectly quiet house, a perfectly executed plan. But that's not it. Peace isn't the absence of the storm. She looked at the fire, then at each of them. Peace is the deep, unshakable knowing that you can find warmth and light and connection in the middle of it. That the storm, and the cancelled plans, and the uncertainty, they aren't the enemy of a good life. They are the material of it. You just have to be willing to sit by the fire and see what happens. Her words hung in the air, sincere and powerful. No one spoke for a moment. They just let the truth of it settle around them, as comforting as the fire's warmth. It was the revelation the storm had been whispering all along. They had not survived an inconvenience. They had participated in a small, perfect metaphor for life itself. Chaos and calm. Isolation and connection. Plan and surrender. All held together in the space of a single, unforgettable night. The fire crackled. The first, brilliant stars pierced the dark velvet sky over the cove. And in the comfortable silence, they all knew this was not an ending. It was a completion. The story of the storm was over, but its meaning was just beginning its journey home with each of them. The truth Alara had spoken, that peace was found within the storm, not in its absence, settled over the group like a gentle mist. It was a truth they had all lived, but giving it words made it solid, something they could carry. The fire crackled in agreement, and for a long while, no one felt the need to speak further. They simply existed in the afterglow of shared understanding, watching the stars multiply over the now calm sea. It was a different silence from the anxious quiet of the storm's peak. This was a silence of fullness, of a shared cup that had been drunk to the dregs and found satisfying. The following morning marked a shift. The temporary world they had built was beginning to dissolve, as all such worlds must. Checkout times loomed for some. The real world, with its obligations and rhythms, began to reassert its gentle pull. At breakfast, there was a bittersweet air. Arthur was leaving after lunch to catch a flight to a conference in Singapore. Anya had decided to cut her trip short by a few days, feeling a torrent of musical inspiration that demanded the solitude of her own studio. Mark, Sophia, and the children were extending their stay, moving to a smaller, garden villa now that the storm threat had passed. The meal was a lingering affair. They all sat together at one long table, the sunlight streaming in, but the conversation was punctuated by practicalities. I've already emailed the head of the conference, Arthur said, stirring his coffee. Told him my presentation will now include an unplanned case study on the social thermodynamics of stormbound human clusters. He'll think I've gone round the bend. Or that you've had a breakthrough, Anya offered. Sometimes they're the same thing. Madame Genevieve, who was staying on, presided with an air of benign permanence. You will all leave traces of yourselves here, you know. In the lounge's memory. I shall feel your ghosts when I take my tea tomorrow. Not ghosts, Leo said. Just echoes. The good kind. Alara felt the impending parting like a physical ache. She had just learned how to be with these people, and now they were leaving. It felt like a cruel joke. But then she remembered her own revelation. This wasn't an interruption of a perfect connection, this was the connection. Finite, precious, and beautiful because of its impermanence. Kai, sensing the mood, approached. "The tide is exceptionally low this morning," he said. "The storm pulled the water out, and it's slow to return. It's revealed a temporary walkway to a small tidal island just off the main beach. It's only accessible for an hour or so. If anyone is looking for a final adventure together." It was a perfect offering. A journey to a fleeting island, mirroring their own fleeting community. Everyone agreed at once. An hour later, they gathered at the water's edge. The sea had indeed retreated, exposing a wide, wet apron of sand, rippled by the waves and littered with shells and sea-worn stones. A rocky path, usually submerged, led like a causeway to a small, rocky islet crowned with a few wind-sculpted trees. They set off in a loose procession, Arthur striding purposefully ahead, the children skipping and shrieking as they discovered hermit crabs, Anya walking slowly with her head down, listening to the crunch of sand underfoot, Madame Genevieve, with Machi in his bag, his nose twitching at the salty air, being assisted by Leo over the slippery rocks, and Alara and Mark and Sophia bringing up the rear. The walk was short but magical. Pools left by the retreating tide teemed with tiny, translucent shrimp and startled, jewel-colored fish. The air smelled intensely of brine and life. Reaching the island felt like a conquest, but a gentle one. They climbed to its modest summit, a flat rock warm from the sun, and looked back at the sanctuary, white and serene against the green cliff. From this new vantage point, everything looked different. They could see the entire curve of the cove, the layout of the gardens, the terrace where Arthur's hat had taken its fateful swim. Their shared story had a geography now, visible and whole. "It's like seeing the stage from the audience," Leo observed. Arthur sat on the rock, his notebook forgotten in his pocket. He just gazed. "Perspective," he said. "That's the final gift. To see the place that held you, from the outside." They didn't stay long. The tide was turning, the first inquisitive waves were already licking at the base of their causeway. As they made their way back, the water followed them, gently reclaiming the sand, erasing their footprints almost as soon as they made them. It was a silent, powerful metaphor that none of them missed. Their time here was being washed away, returning to the sea of ordinary days. The walk back to the resort was quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts of departure and integration. Lunch was the true farewell. Arthur had to leave for the airport immediately after. They ate at the same long table, but the mood was softer, more tender. When the time came, Arthur stood. He was not a man given to effusive displays, but he cleared his throat and looked at each of them. "In my field," he began, "we talk about liminal spaces, thresholds between two states. The shoreline. The river mouth. The ocean surface. These are the places of greatest energy, creativity, and life." He paused. "This past day and a half, we existed in a liminal space. Between storm and calm, between stranger and friend, between plan and spontaneity. It has been a profound privilege to share it with you all. Thank you." He gave a small, formal bow of his head. Then, to everyone's surprise, he walked around the table and shook each person's hand, even the children's, with great seriousness. When he came to Kai, who was standing by to see him off, he shook his hand firmly with both of his. "You are a fine steward of liminal spaces, Kai." "Thank you." With that, he picked up his single bag, placed his still-warped hat on his head at a jaunty angle, and walked out of the lounge without looking back. They watched him go, a solitary, upright figure moving from their temporary world back into the stream of his own. His departure opened the floodgates. Anya left next, after hugging Alara and Leo and promising, sincerely, to send a recording if her storm suite ever came to fruition. "You'll be in it," she whispered to Alara. The melody of letting go. The family, Mark, Sophia, Liam, and Chloe, said their goodbyes soon after, moving to their new villa with promises to build a cushioned fort in honor of the storm night. And then, there were four: Alara, Leo, Madame Genevieve, and Machi, plus the constant, gentle presence of Kai in the background. The afternoon felt spacious and slow. Alara and Leo had one full day left. They spent it doing nothing of consequence. They read in the shade. They swam laps in the pool not for exercise, but for the sensation of cool water on sun-warmed skin. They held hands. At one point, Alara found herself alone with Madame Genevieve in the lounge. The older woman was writing in a small, leather journal. "Recording the events for posterity?" Alara asked, sitting beside her. In a manner of speaking, Madame Genevieve said, not closing the book. "I am writing a letter to my husband. Telling him about the storm. About the people. About the hat." She smiled a private smile. "It feels less like writing to the past and more like updating him. Including him in the ongoing story." "That's beautiful," Alara said softly. "It is a practice I intend to continue," Madame Genevieve said. She looked at Alara. "You seem settled." The woman who arrived with the color-coded agenda would be vibrating with anxiety about optimizing her last day. "You are simply inhabiting it." Alara nodded. "I feel like I've been given a new set of eyes. Or maybe I just cleaned the ones I had. Everything looks clearer, softer." "That is the dust of plans settling," Madame Genevieve said sagely. "It blinds so many of us." That evening, Alara and Leo had a private dinner on their villa's balcony, under a canopy of stars so bright they seemed within reach. They talked about home, about work, but the conversations were different. They spoke not of logistics, but of feeling. How could they bring the spirit of the storm lounge into their apartment? Maybe a regular, screen-free night by a candle. Maybe saying yes to more unplanned invitations. "I don't want to go back to being the person who misses life because she's too busy planning it," Alara said. "You won't," Leo said, with utter confidence. "That person got caught in a storm and discovered she was waterproof. She's not going to forget that." The next morning was their departure. As they wheeled their suitcases into the lobby for checkout, they found Madame Genevieve waiting for them, Machi at her feet. "I came to see you off," she said. "Proper goodbyes are a dying art." Kai was also there, ready to oversee their departure. The formalities were quick. As Alara handed over her key card, she felt a surge of unexpected emotion. This place was no longer just a luxury resort, it was the setting of a personal revolution. "Thank you, Kai," she said, her voice thick. "For everything. For the tea, for the fire, for holding the space." Kai smiled, his professional demeanor softening into genuine warmth. "It was my honor. You all taught me something about what hospitality can truly be. It is not just about providing comfort, but about curating the possibility for connection. I will not forget it." He handed them each a small, wrapped package. A small token from the sanctuary. They opened them there. Inside were two simple, beautiful ceramic mugs, glazed in a deep, stormy gray-blue. Inside each, etched at the bottom, was a single word: peace. Alara clutched hers to her chest, unable to speak. Madame Genevieve stepped forward. "For you," she said to Alara, pressing a small, cloth-wrapped object into her hand. It was the augur shell from the jungle, now strung on a delicate silver chain. a reminder that treasures appear in the most unexpected places. To Leo, she gave a small, vintage pocket compass for navigating the unplanned journeys. They hugged her then, this formidable, elegant woman who had become their unexpected anchor. "Travel safely," she said. "And remember, a storm on the horizon is not a warning to batten down the hatches. It is an invitation to gather by the fire." With final waves, Alara and Leo walked down the stone path to the waiting car. They looked back once, at the Jade Cove Sanctuary perched on its cliff, at Madame Genevieve and Kai waving from the terrace, at the brilliant, innocent blue of the post-storm sky. The drive to the airport was quiet. Alara held her shell necklace and her mug, physical anchors to a feeling. She didn't feel sad, exactly. She felt expanded. As if the storm had blown open a window inside her that she hadn't known was stuck shut. The airport was a jarring re-entry into the world of noise, haste, and impersonal efficiency. But Alara found she moved through it differently. When their flight was delayed by an hour, Leo braced for her old frustration. Instead, she took his hand, led him to a quiet corner, and they sat. She bought them overpriced airport tea, and they people watched, making up stories about where travelers were going. "See," she said. "A microstorm. And we're having tea." Boarding the plane, finding their seats, the familiar rituals of long-haul travel, it all felt both ordinary and newly sacred. As the plane taxied, Alara looked out the window at the island receding below, a green jewel in a sapphire sea. She thought of Arthur in Singapore, Anya in her studio, the family in their new villa, Madame Genevieve writing her letter, Kai lighting the evening fire. They were scattered now, back to their separate orbits. But for a short, luminous while, they had formed a constellation, held together by the gravity of a storm. And that, she knew, would forever change how her own light shone. She leaned her head against Leo's shoulder as the plane climbed into the clouds. Below, the ocean stretched out, vast and calm, holding the memory of the storm deep in its silent, blue heart. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to feel it all, the roar, the calm, the fire, the shells, the connection, one more time before she landed, changed, into her old life. The return to ordinary life was, as it often is, both jarring and illuminating. For Alara and Leo, the city greeted them with its constant hum, a different kind of white noise, one of engines and distant sirens and the collective buzz of millions of lives intersecting without touching. Their apartment felt both familiar and strange. The clean lines and neat shelves, once a source of pride to Alara, now seemed sterile compared to the vibrant, messy life of the storm lounge. But they had brought back their talismans. Alara placed the storm gray mug on her desk at work, a silent sentinel against the tide of emails. She wore the auger shell necklace under her blouse, its hidden weight a comfort. Leo kept the pocket compass on his bedside table, a reminder that direction could be found even without a map. The first week was a conscious practice. When a sudden downpour canceled their weekend plans for an outdoor concert, Alara felt the old twinge of frustration. Then she caught Leo's eye. Without a word, they pulled cushions onto the floor, lit every candle they owned, and made a fort. They ordered extravagant takeout and told each other stories, making up fantastical tales about their neighbors across the street. It was silly, and imperfect, and profoundly joyful. The storm had taught them how to build a shelter anywhere. Madame Genevieve, true to her word, extended her stay at the Jade Cove Sanctuary. She continued to take her tea in the lounge each afternoon. Sometimes she wrote in her journal. Sometimes she simply watched the sea, now serene, and felt the echoes of laughter and music that seemed baked into the very stones. She had Kai hang a small, simple watercolor of a rain-lushed palm tree in the lobby, a piece she commissioned from a local artist. To honor the occasion, she told him. It was her way of leaving a permanent mark on the liminal space. When she finally returned to her apartment in Paris, the silence was different. It was no longer the silence of absence, but of integration. She placed a seashell on her late husband's portrait shelf. She began a new letter. My dear, you'll never believe the people one meets when the sky falls down. Arthur presented his paper at the Singapore conference. He began not with graphs, but with an anecdote about a hat, a koi pond, and a shared pot of tea. The audience was captivated. His colleagues remarked that he seemed different, softer, more engaged. He quietly began a side project, a paper he called The Hospitality of Crises, How Temporary Communities Form in Adverse Conditions. He emailed Kai regularly, asking for observations, treating the front desk manager as a fellow researcher. Anya returned to her studio, but not to silence. She played recordings of the storm, of the lounge's ambient noise, and of her own improvisation from that night. Her storm suite began to take shape. The first movement, The Gathering, was tense, filled with plucked strings and rumbling low notes. The second, The Hearth, bloomed with warm, intertwining melodies for cello and clarinet. The third, The Cleansing, was all spacious, falling notes for piano and a single, pure voice, sounding like rain after the thunder has passed. She never intended to publish it, it was her private symphony of remembrance. Mark and Sophia instituted family storm nights at home. Once a month, they'd turn off all screens, build a pillow fort in the living room, order pizza, and play board games by flashlight. The children, Liam and Chloe, adored it. They didn't fully understand the origin, but they felt the magic, the special, conspiratorial warmth of choosing connection over distraction. And Kai? He presented his formal proposal for Sanctuary Storm Protocol to the resort's management. He included guest feedback, gleaned from delighted comments left at checkout, staff perspectives, and a modest budget for candles, tea, and a dedicated storm menu. Management, seeing not just the guest satisfaction scores but the genuine glow in Kai's usually reserved eyes, approved it on a trial basis. The Jade Cove Sanctuary quietly added a new line to its list of amenities, curated comfort during tropical weather events. Weeks turned into months. The vivid intensity of the storm experience softened into a gentle, persistent glow, a North Star in each of their personal skies. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, deep in a demanding work project, Alara felt the familiar claws of anxiety tightening around her chest. Deadlines loomed, details swarmed. She reached for her phone, an old reflex to numb the feeling with scrolling. Her fingers brushed the shell at her throat. She stopped. She put the phone down. She picked up her storm gray mug, walked to the office kitchen, and made a cup of tea. She didn't bring it back to her desk. She stood at the window, watching the city rain stripe the glass, and she just breathed. She remembered the solid feel of the lounge floor, the smell of wood smoke and rain, the sound of Anya's piano mixing with the wind. The anxiety didn't vanish, but it lost its edge. It became just another kind of weather, passing through. She was in her own sanctuary. She was waterproof. That evening, she told Leo about it. It was like I could access it, she said. The feeling. Like it's a room I built inside myself, and I can go there anytime. Leo nodded. I did something similar last week. A client meeting was going off the rails, everyone talking in circles. I felt myself getting frustrated, wanting to force my plan. Then I remembered the tide. How it goes out and comes back. I just stopped talking. I listened. And the solution floated in like Arthur's hat. He smiled. It was a terrible analogy, but it worked. Their lives weren't magically stress-free. They still argued over chores, worried about money, got stuck in traffic. But the texture of their days had changed. There was a new layer of resilience, a willingness to be bored, to be interrupted, to look for the hidden seashell in the upturned roots of a bad day. Half a year after the storm, Alara received a package. The return address was the Jade Cove Sanctuary. Inside, with no note, was a small, beautiful book. It was a handmade, leather-bound journal. The first page held a pressed frangipani blossom. The second page had a single line of elegant handwriting she recognized as Madame Genevieve's, for recording the weather within. Tears filled Alara's eyes. It was the perfect gift. She began to use it not as a planner, but as a witness. She wrote about feelings, not tasks. A moment of sun on the kitchen floor. The sound of Leo humming off-key. The frustrating rain that made her slow down and notice the pattern of drops on the window pane. The journal became her own private lounge, a place to gather her scattered self. One evening, as winter approached and a different kind of storm, a blizzard, was forecast for the city, Alara and Leo prepared. They bought groceries, charged their devices, and then, as the first flakes began to fall, they enacted their ritual. Cushions by the fireplace, a gas one, but it still glowed, candles lit, phones set aside. Leo made spiced hot chocolate. Alara opened her journal. "What should we do?" Leo asked, echoing his question from that first day on the balcony. Alara looked at the fire, then at him, then at the snow beginning to blanket the world outside in a hushed, peaceful silence. "I think we're already doing it," she said. And they were. They had built a sanctuary that traveled. The principles were portable: presence over productivity, connection over consumption, warmth as a verb. Across the world, in their own ways, the others were doing the same. Arthur, in a bustling university cafeteria, chose to sit with a group of anxious freshman students instead of at his usual isolated table. He told them about the storm, about the koi fish. They listened, rapt, their own anxieties momentarily forgotten in the shared story. Anya finished her storm suite. She played it alone in her studio one night during a thunderstorm, the real and the composed music weaving together. She felt a profound sense of peace, of having translated something ineffable into form. She saved the file, a secret treasure on her hard drive. Madame Genevieve, in Paris, hosted a small salon. She served tea, not champagne. She asked her accomplished, often guarded friends to share a story of an unexpected detour that led to something beautiful. The conversation that followed was deeper, richer, and more vulnerable than any she'd heard in that room before. Kai, at the resort, oversaw the first official storm gathering under the new protocol. A smaller squall was approaching. He lit the fire, set out the tea, and put on the ambient music. Guests trickled in, looking disappointed. He simply smiled and offered them a cup. Slowly, as the rain fell, they too began to talk, to share, to connect. It wasn't the same magic as that first epic storm, how could it be, but it was a gentle, genuine echo. Kai felt a deep satisfaction. He was tending a flame, and it was spreading. The storm at the Jade Cove Sanctuary had been a singular event, a collision of specific people and elemental force. But its meaning was renewable. It was a lesson in inner architecture, how to build a hearth in your heart that no wind could extinguish. For Alara, the final piece of understanding came on a perfectly ordinary, sunny day. She was walking through a park, her mind busy with a dozen trivial concerns. A sudden, brief gust of wind blew through, rustling the leaves of a large oak tree with a sound exactly like rushing water. It stopped as quickly as it started. In that moment, she was transported. Not just in memory, but in essence. She felt the same expansive calm, the same connectedness, the same deep peace she had felt in the lounge. It wasn't triggered by crisis or candlelight, but by a simple gust of wind on a Tuesday. She understood then that the sanctuary was never the building, or even the group of people. It was a quality of attention. A decision to see interruption as invitation, to see strangers as potential friends, to see chaos as a kind of wild, creative music. The storm had merely been the loud, dramatic teacher that got her to finally sit down and listen. She sat on a park bench, closed her eyes, and let the feeling wash over her. The peace wasn't something she had found on vacation. It was something she had learned, and could now practice. Here, anywhere. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the distant sounds of the city, the new, familiar storm, she thought of them all, her storm-bound constellation, scattered across the globe. She sent a silent wish into the darkness, a wish that they too could feel, in an ordinary moment, that extraordinary calm. That they would remember they were waterproof. And as she drifted into sleep, the last conscious thought she had was not a thought at all, but a feeling, the deep, solid support of the earth beneath her, the vast, starry sky above, and her own breath, steady and sure, riding gently between them, in the perfect, peaceful calm after the storm. Epilogue, a guide back to yourself. And so, dear listener, the story closes. But its invitation remains open, here and now, for you. You have journeyed through this tale, through the fury and the calm, the isolation and the connection. You have witnessed how a group of strangers built a sanctuary not from stone and wood, but from presence and shared humanity. Now, let the essence of that story settle into the quiet spaces of your own being. Feel the weight of your body, fully supported. Hear the gentle rhythm of your breath, in and out, like waves on a shore after a storm. The day, with all its plans and interruptions, is done. It is safe to let it go. You carry within you everything you need to find your own sanctuary. You need no tropical resort, no dramatic storm. You only need to remember the fundamental truth that was whispered by the wind and echoed by the fire. Peace is not the absence of the storm, peace is the quiet, unshakable space within you that hears the thunder and does not tremble. It is the part of you that can light a candle in the dark, that can offer a kind word, that can choose to see a cancelled plan as a blank page. Tonight, as you rest, imagine that peaceful space inside you. Perhaps it feels like a warm, gentle light in the center of your chest. Perhaps it feels like a deep, still pool in the quietest part of your mind. Whatever its form, turn your attention there. This is your inner hearth. Your eternal shelter. No wind can touch it. No rain can dampen its glow. It is always there, waiting for you to come home. So come home now. Settle into this feeling of profound safety. Let the sounds around you, the feel of the sheets, the rhythm of your heart, all be reminders that you are here, you are held, you are at peace. The story ends. The fire burns low. The stars shine over a calm sea, and you, dear listener, are safe in your own sanctuary. Breathe in, peace, breathe out, release, and drift, now, into the deepest, most restorative sleep. Good night.